Mute myself first. So today we're going to be going over CIS framework controls V8. These controls are a lot. There's a lot of them, but they're very technical. They're highly technical. So we're going to talk about them. So you might have a lot of questions because be ready because some of these are going to be somewhat complicated. And I'm going to go into them in a very complicated manner. So if this doesn't make sense, then uh, maybe jot down your questions for the end because it's gonna get rough on this one. It's gonna be like a little bit of a river rafting ride. The other ones were more of a tranquil pass through. This one's gonna be on like some type 2. So the first thing we'd like to talk about is Lionfish, the platform. We're going to use Lionfish, the platform, to track our our compliance and making sure that we're compliant with our framework or with our control set. The reason why we do this is because if we don't, we have to have some sort of other compliance platform, or we have to build out our own SharePoint or Excel document, or we have to build out our own Word document and kind of keep track of everything on our own. Very difficult to do, very time consuming. So we don't want to do that. We want to use a product like Lionfish to be able to, track our compliance. We'll go into a little bit later about, some of the features and functionality of the Lionfish platform and why we would use it. But let's dive right in. I love getting into stuff. I don't like talking a lot about myself and all that other stuff. I like getting to the meat and potatoes of the deal. So let's do it. Um, Control 1.1. Establish and maintain detailed enterprise asset inventory. They want you to have an enterprise asset inventory tool or a SaaS platform or some sort of SaaS, which stands for software as a service, or a PaaS, platform as a service. So you need to run an inventory program. These are inventory programs. They're usually can be accomplished also with what's called an RMM tool, remote monitoring and management. Once you have all your computers inside of an asset inventory tool, you can keep track of them. So there's also something called Spiceworks. There's also CRM tools which have enterprise asset inventory. What does enterprise mean? It usually means that it's shareable. It has the ability to have roles and responsibilities that can go in there and see it, like editors. It's not standalone. It's not on a machine like a workstation. It's on a server. So those are the things they mean by enterprise. Address unauthorized assets. If you have something in your environment that is running like an RMM tool and it's scanning your environment, your IP address range, your subnets for new machines, then it can detect that new machine. Now, there are also other application servers and SaaS products that can detect unauthorized assets. I know Cisco has a device that you can put on your network that will scan your environment, and if it finds a MAC address or something else that's not been put on an authorized asset list, then it will flag it. It can block it. So when you're talking about authorized assets, you may want to go down a couple routes. The first route is that you go with a MAC address environment, where MAC addresses are these individual numbered addresses that each device in your environment has, so that if a MAC address joins your network, like somebody's phone or somebody's workstation or laptop or Chromebook, and it joins your environment, then the MAC address is not going to align with the approved list of MAC addresses that you already have inside of your like your Cisco server that says, okay, only these sets of MAC addresses can join. A perfect example is that I had a customer with this MAC address environment, and their son brought a Chromebook to work on from school. He joined his son's Chromebook to the guest network, to the house network, and it flagged it. It said, okay, look, this unauthorized asset joined the network. we're going to flag it and let the IT group know. The group found that what port that he was in, what access point that there was. They went and investigated. They found the Chromebook. The CEO asked, or the executive asked, why his son's Chromebook wasn't working. He had given him the password to the guest network, and they explained that they use a MAC address authorized system to manage the network, and that's why that they were blocked. You can also have a certificate-based asset authorization environment where you give everybody in the environment a certificate. They use that certificate to register with a server or product in your environment, and then if you don't have that certificate on your machine, then you aren't allowed in. And then there could even be IP address and port based asset and adding, so that if you plug something into a port in your office and it's not authorized, that port isn't authorized for that particular machine, or it's not a live port, then it will block it as well. So there's a bunch of different ways to stop unauthorized assets. It requires some sort of server or appliance that can do that. Utilize an Active Directory tool. Active Directory is it's a server that runs on Windows. It uses this protocol called LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. So if you have an Active Directory environment, it means that you have an identity environment. So Active Directory provides identity. You can use LDAP-based servers if you have a Linux environment or a Mac environment. The Mac and Linux environments can function off an LDAP server. So Active Directory is a translation of LDAP. So you can have an AD server in your Windows environment. It's called a DC, domain controller, and the domain controller will provide you with Active Directory. In the Linux environment, you can have LDAP running on a server. And then there's a couple other weirder IBM-based LDAP tools that you can use that will also work, but those are old school. Nowadays, it's just Microsoft or a Linux server running LDAP. Use dynamic host configuration protocols, DHCP, logging to update enterprise asset inventory. So whenever a machine joins your network, the network usually has a DHCP server running, dynamic host configuration protocol. And what that DHCP server does is it can also act in some ways as a MAC address filter, or you can allow certain machines via MAC address with this DHCP server. But the DHCP server's function is that it gives out IP addresses to machines that join your network. So if you have a machine that you plug into the wall, or you have a machine that you join with a Wi-Fi network, it will need to get an IP address in order to function on your enterprise domain or your environment. When that IP address is given out, it's usually given out by a DHCP server that can be running on your domain controller. It could be running on your firewall, or it could be running on your wireless access point. So you can have a variety of different ways to run your DHCP server. Usually you use a DHCP server running on a domain controller. The second best methodology is when you have it running on your firewall, and the third most common way is running on your wireless access point. DHCP is critical, but the functionality control of it is best in the AD environment, Active Directory and domain controller for Windows. It has the most functionality, the most controls. The second is the firewall, and the third being that's why I would recommend them in that order. So you would want to use DHCP. Use a passive asset discovery tool. So passive is something that's running like a scanner on a different basis. So on a infrequent basis. So that's what passive means. What does active mean? Active means it's constantly scanning, like it's live. So they don't want you to have the live asset discovery tool. They want you to have the passive one, which is something that runs on a regular basis, like daily. Again, your RMM tool will do this. And then the other device I mentioned, the Cisco identity engine, appliance. There are other appliances you can buy that will also do this, that can do passive asset discovery tool scans. There's also vulnerability scanners that can run and do passive asset discovery. So you have a lot of options there to run passive asset discovery. Again, Spiceworks will also do this for you. And then they're like warranty.com, I think. Warranty has a system that runs that searches out the assets and tries to figure out if they are under warranty, and then they'll like want you to buy warranty renewal for those devices. So there's a bunch of different ways of going about doing passive asset discovery. And in some scenarios, your DHCP server is going to also function as this a little bit, because anybody who adds a machine to your network, your DHCP server is going to do like a discovery of it and say, okay, it has been added, but it won't figure out what the asset is, what applications and operating systems it's running, what's MAC. It'll tell you what its MAC address is, but other than that, your DHCP server will warn you if there's more assets added to your environment. Manage access control for remote assets. So what do they want here is that they want you to have some sort of identity engine that allows you to control your remote assets. So your remote assets are assets that are not within your network infrastructure. That could be like your Azure environment. Okay, so that's step one. Your Azure environment or your AWS environment needs to have controls. Those controls are done by IAM in AWS and Azure Active Directory in Azure. So you're going to want to create identity engines within those cloud environments. Other cloud environments have other tools that they use for identity control. You're going to want to create roles and responsibilities. So a role is like an IT person could be an admin, or an IT a worker in your environment could be like a power user or a user, and they have particular access control policies that control what they can do. So your administrators are going to be able to do things like create users, change passwords, add resources, and your users are going to only really be able to open maybe virtual desktops and access that, or see like business continuity servers or products that they might want to use, like SAP or Oracle or some other source or resource that they're going to be able to access. You want to make sure that they do that within your identity engine that controls it. Again, IAM in AWS, Azure Active Directory inside of Azure. Other companies have other tools, and some of these tools can be LDAP based. They can synchronize with your on-prem server, like in Azure Active Directory. You can do Active Directory synchronization between your on-prem environment and your remote environment, so that you have the ability to stay contiguous. Then there's also a concept called single sign-on, SSO. So single sign-on is another ability for you to create an environment where your identity is contiguous across all enterprise devices. So when you have SSO, it basically means that you have a source like your Azure Active Directory or your IAM, where you use that source to populate all of your identity across all of your remote resources. So SSO capable things are available across a variety of different methodologies you can use on all of the different SaaS and application-based products that you use. So SSO can be done. There's another protocol called SAML. You can use SAML capable device applications and resources that use SAML that will allow for SSO to take place. It requires that you use a bunch of different protocols and API calls and all these different things that you need to set up within SAML to make it work in SSO across your SaaS or PaaS or application-based environments. It's a mouthful. Centralized security event alerting. What they want here is something called a SIM. A SIM is a server or a service. It's something similar. What's called Splunk. Splunk is a SIM. Sumo Logic makes a SIM. A variety of different providers create SIMs. SIMs gather logs from all of your syslog capable devices, or all of the devices that are able to do what's called logging. Logging is going to tell, like a firewall, for instance, has a syslog server on it. That firewall syslog server needs to be pointed at the SIM. So you get a SIM product like Splunk, you point your firewall at the SIM product, and you start doing logging and log analysis. Now, Splunk has a AI module built into it that allows for your server event logs, or your security event logs, or your workstation or whatever, to go to it and be parsed and analyzed by an AI. So the AI engine looks at all thousands and thousands of those logs and tries to create a pattern for security purposes. So if it detects that somebody's logging in from France, but they're also logging in from New Jersey, it's going to say that that's a problem. Those two things can't happen at the same time. It's called an impossible login. And when you have an impossible login, it'll create an event. It'll say, look, there's an impossible login occurring here. Once that event is created, you need to point that event device at a ticketing system. So now you need a SIM, you need syslog capable devices. So if some of your older equipment is not syslog capable, some of the older and non-commercial thing are the things that are like home brewed or homemade, like Netgear stuff, is like not enterprise level. It's not like company based. Enterprise, you need to get that. It's called a next generation firewall. NGFWs is what they're called. So you want to get something like a next generation firewall or a layer 2 switch. If you have a layer 1 switch, you're not going to be able usually to do logging from it, or if it's like a Netgear or a switch or a D-Link switch or something you got from the store, you're not going to be able to do logging. So you're going to want to nix that. You want to have something that is syslog capable. So that's going to be either a next generation firewall or a layer 2 switch, or something that has syslog capabilities. Usually servers don't have it. Windows servers don't have it. So you're going to get something. You're going to get a device, an application on there like Splunk or something, or Splunk agent, or something like a Snare, or there's a variety of different syslog converted applications you can get for Windows devices, but Windows don't normally create security event logs. Now there are application servers and appliances and enterprise level servers that do track security event logs within uh, within Windows, and you can get Microsoft based Defender. There's Azure Defender. They all call all their products Defender. So don't think that the Defender product in Azure is the one that runs on your workstation and keeps you semi-protected from viruses. So there's Azure Defender, which allows this to occur, but it's really overall, it's a SIM anyway. The one in Azure is a SIM, so you're going to want to use that if you have a Windows environment. It's really good that you don't have to buy Snare or install agents on machines. So you can use if you have a Windows environment, you can go towards an Azure Defender environment and track all of your security event logs. But again, if you have an event log, an item, you're going to want to point that at your Azure Defender, and then from there you're going to want to make a ticket out of it. You're going to want to have a ticketing tracking system and a ticket aware, like Zendesk or Autotask or ConnectWise if you're an MSP or a service provider. If not, you want to get Zendesk or something like any other ticketing system to keep track of all your security events. So there's a lot of things going on this control. a SIM, the background connect capability of it, and your ticketing system. All right, deploy a host-based intrusion detection system. So intrusion detection, IPS, IDS is called. Intrusion prevention, intrusion detection is usually at your fringes or your borders. You have intrusion detection. Usually you can have an intrusion detection appliance. You can also have buy intrusion detection on your next generation firewall. Usually the old school firewalls don't have anything about it. It's a module. Usually you buy an extra module called intrusion detection, intrusion prevention. But there are also like the Cisco device I mentioned earlier. The Cisco Identity Engine has intrusion detection built in. A component of intrusion detection also is capable of detecting when a device comes on to your network, which is 1.2, address unauthorized assets. So the Cisco or the other appliance, it's going to just be called an appliance. There's a bunch of IDS, IPS products out there. They range from about $7,000 to about $30,000 or $40,000 each. So when you have an intrusion detection system at your fringe or at the higher level network layer, which is like your firewall and your switches, then it's gonna be an appliance, or it's gonna be part of your firewall itself. So that's an intrusion detection system. This is called a HIDS. So those are IPS, IDS. This is called HIDS, HIDS. So what's HIDS? How is it different? Well, HIDS is deployed on workstations and telephones and laptops and tablets. So that's what HIDS is. So when you have a HIDS piece of software, you put it on there, and it prevents it doesn't prevent it in some cases. It detects it. So it says, look, someone's trying to access your computer that's not you, or a person in your environment is trying to access a share on your system that's not you. There are a bunch of HIDS based products. They're a little expensive. This is not a cheap, like $3 a month kind of deal. This is more like a $7, $10, $15 a month, or $79 or $80 a year, product. It could be $175, $200 product. So you got to buy a product for this, or you have to use an appliance. Some of the IDS, IPS appliances also let you roll out an HIDS application to your workstations, and it'll take control. So some of the more complete applications and companies that work solely on intrusion detection will have a HIDS-based environment, a HIDS-based application that you can install that will connect to their overall security footprint. And that's the good part about when you're shopping out things. When you're shopping out something that you want to buy, you usually don't want to buy it from a big giant super company like Amazon or Microsoft, because they don't spend all day long thinking about it. Some of the people in their department, I'm sure, do, but the whole company's not dedicated. Microsoft is not dedicated towards HIDS, but there are companies out there that just make HIDS, and that's all they think about. That's all they innovate against all the time, every day. They're trying to get to the top of the list. They're trying to be the most best. And so when you shop out a company that's like intrusion detection with a HIDS backend and other things that are going on in their environment, those are the best ones to pick, because they're the top of their field, usually in the Gartner groups of innovators or the best. So that's what you want to get. You don't want to go with something that is that's done by like a super company. You also want to make sure that you don't buy a bunch of different products, if you can, which is going back towards the bigger companies. But some of these other ones that specialize in intrusion detection and HIDS, you try not to buy one product for every single little thing. You want to try to buy one product that covers a couple things. And the reason for that is it cuts down on maintenance, support. If you have to go around checking 11 different systems for patches, upgrades, updates, it becomes it becomes more difficult. It's called the single pane of glass. That's when we use the single pane of glass terminology. Everybody in IT wants a single pane of glass, single pane of glass. What does that mean? It means we want everything to be all in one place so that we don't have to go to 11 different places in order to look at things and modify things. We want a single pane of glass. Azure and Microsoft and Amazon do provide the single pane of glass story, but like I said, they don't necessarily innovate and are on the leading edge of technology and innovation in those environments. They're usually a couple gens back, which is why I don't usually suggest them unless you don't have a lot of complexity. Deploy a network intrusion detection system. This is called NIDS. So the other one was called HIDS. This one's called NIDS. The other one's called IPS and IDS. So again, this isn't at your fringe, which would be your IPS, IDS. This is within your network. So this can sit on a switch with a mirrored port. So you have a switch environment, you have a mirrored port on that switch. What happens when you mirror a port is that you take one of the ports of your environment and you allow all traffic to pass through that port and be analyzed. So imagine you have a 24 port switch and you want to mirror one of the ports. All 23 of those other ports will pass their traffic through that one port. And so what you do is you put the NIDS device, it sits on that port, maybe number 2 or number 1, and all traffic is passing through it from the switch. It's being mirrored there. It's a mirrored switch. It's a mirrored switch port. All traffic's being mirrored there. So then it gives the NIDS the ability to see all the traffic that is passing through, and it does a traffic analysis of your environment, and it looks at all the traffic and sees what's going on. You can get a little baby NIDS on your workstation. It's called Wireshark. So if you get an application called Wireshark, and are you familiar with it, you can look and see what a NIDS would do on your workstation. So if you run Wireshark, it'll capture all the traffic on your workstation's port, and it'll pass it over to you, and it'll allow you to do an analysis on it. And so that's what a NIDS is. And NIDS can also run on your Wi-Fi environment, runs on your switch environment. You have to have a network in order to, of course, have a NIDS. If you don't have a network, you can't have a NIDS. But let me say this. Let me take a pause here and say, if you don't have these things, still create a policy that talks about what you would do, what you would use, how you would do it, and what actions you would take in the event that there was some sort of a network intrusion. You want to still have a policy so you can meet these controls. A lot of these controls, people are like, well, I'm a one-person show. I don't have a network. I don't have switches. I don't have firewalls. I just work from home and I use I used to use OneDrive. Well, you can still create policies and procedures that talk about what you would do, how you would do it in the event that there's some sort of an audit that takes place. You want to score as highly as possible by having these processes, policies, and procedures in place that would say, if I did have it, this is how I would do it. Or you might even be ambiguous. You would say, the way that our network intrusion detection is in place is that we would have this. We would have Azure Defender in place and set up properly, that kind of thing. So create policies and procedures that support what you would do in the event you had an environment. The reason for that is if you actually are doing really well and you're kicking butt and taking names and your company grows, you are ready to go when you have to get a NIDS. So your IT guy is going to go, well, what are we going to do here? You're going to say, I already have a plan. Here it is. And you give it to him and he implements on it. So NIDS, HIDS. Now we're going to do traffic filtering between network segments. So what do we do here? Well, we have to have an infrastructure that's capable of having multiple subnets. Subnets are different computer IP address ranges within your environment. They can be physical subnets or logical subnets. Physical subnets are subnets that are separated switch to switch. So you have a switch over in building 1. You can have that be on its own subnet. It is separated because it has its own IP address range on it. You can't reach it from your network unless you have a router or a layer 3 switch. You have to have a switch that has layer 3 capabilities in order to route, or you have to have a router. Now, once you have a router in place, the router routes traffic between building A and your primary building. So if you need to pass traffic over to building A, it will go out over the router or layer 3 switch. And then you're going to have to put your firewall on both of those networks. So your firewall usually has more than one port. That they build these next generation firewalls with 4 to 8 ports. You can plug your firewall in to the other switch and pass traffic over your firewall, or have your firewall perform traffic analysis and filtering between both of the networks, network A and the primary building. Network A might be 192.168.10.0, and the primary building might be 192.168.0.0. Those networks are going to be separate, and you're going to need to perform traffic filtering between the two networks. You do that either over a layer 3 switch or over with your firewall. Layer 3 switches have access control and traffic control capabilities. So a layer 3 switch costs more than a layer 2 or 1 switch. Usually it could cost one 1,500 up to $8,000 or $9,000. You could get a layer 3 switch, or a router will also cost you $1,600, $800 up to $5,000 to $7,000. It depends on what kind of traffic you're passing. If you're passing a ton of traffic over that network, you need a more powerful switch because it's analyzing every packet that's going over the router, and so that takes CPU and memory. And when you have a large amount of data passing through from one location to another, you're going to want to get bigger and bigger routers or bigger and bigger layer 3 switches and be able to pass that traffic through and perform filtering and traffic analysis. You could do traffic and filtering analysis within those devices. There are literally hundreds of options inside of a layer 3 switch or inside of a firewall. And you get those different options by going in there and configuring them, programming them. There's a variety of different programming flags that you could set. You can allow traffic in and out as you see fit. There is a principle in our industry. It's called deny by exception. So what you want to do is you want to deny all the traffic that you aren't sure of and allow all the traffic you are sure of. So if you know that a certain protocol, a certain type of traffic needs to be passed through, which is on certain ports or using certain different protocol names, like for instance, we talked about DHCP, that is a protocol that you would want to allow over to the other network if you were going to be passing DHCP from your primary resource over to your secondary location in building A. So you could pass that traffic over and not stop it, not filter it, but allow it through. And so that would be an example of doing some sort of configuration on the switch, layer 3 switch, or the firewall that would allow DHCP traffic to pass from your primary building over to building A. So there are hundreds of thousands of other protocols you may need to allow or not allow. Some of the protocols like FTP is another example. You may not allow FTP to pass through from one side to the other, which would hinder any FTP activity. But if you don't have any FTP activity, then that would be great. You'd be stopping that, and it would be not allowing that particular protocol to be passed over. All right, there we go. That was a lot of stuff that was said that are these HIDs, NIDs, DHCP, AWS, IAM, a lot of terminology that was there. That's very complicated. So again, products, appliances, all these different things that can help you here, but it's not simple. This is not a simple endeavor. You have to be able to understand Active Directory, how to scan networks, vulnerability scanning, ticketing systems, SIMs. We said a lot, so there was a lot there. So does anybody have any questions about all that or any of that? Somebody asked if the recording is available. Yes, Jeremy will provide everybody with the recording. And then it'll be up also. There's a site that it's on so that you can listen to it over and over again if you didn't understand what was being said. And you can also reach out to Jeremy or myself, and we will help you, give you assistance, give you advice, that kind of thing. No questions. Everybody knows which HITS product they want to buy and the sim they're going to set up, and if their HIDS can be sim. Can the HIDS be sim capable? Can the NIDS be sim capable? Does anybody know? None questions. Can they? Yes, they can. So yeah, you can have as long as the component is it produces syslog, you definitely can have your HIDS and NIDS talk to the sim, and it's very helpful. Those things are very helpful. But let me warn you that HIDS and NIDS will create um, a large amount of data. So there's actually a measuring stick for data that comes out of different things. You can look it up if you want to on Google. You can ask Google how much syslog data does like a access point create, and it'll tell you that it creates like 1 gig of data a month. So and this is another question that was asked, how long do you keep your records? Well, if you have a HIDS device that's producing 1.2 gigs of data a month, and you have 100 of them, you have a terabyte of data that you're going to have to store in your environment. So say you have a terabyte of data that is produced by your HIDS devices, then you're going to be like, well, how long can you store it for? Well, I'll tell you how long. How much space do you have? So you have to have some sort of space that you take into account here. So if you have a terabyte of data every month just coming from your HIDS, and maybe you have 2 to 3 more terabytes of data coming from your next generation and your SAS and your PAS and your IDS IPS, maybe that's all producing another 3 or 4 terabytes of data. So now you have 5 terabytes of data. How long are you going to store for? Well, how long can you keep up with that pace? 5 terabytes a month is 60 terabytes a year. So if you want to keep it for a year, you're going to have 60 terabytes of storage. So there you go. You can keep it for as long as you must. Now, there's a question here. How long are regulations? Well, I'll tell you, you have to keep certain data up to 7 years for HIPAA. So you have to, well, but you're like, well, I can't. How am I going to keep 60 terabytes of data for for 7 years? That's like a petabyte. I mean, can I do it? Well, here's some solutions for you. Number one, you can trim your logs. You can trim your logs. There's ways to trim down logs where you're not keeping nonsensical log entries. Like sometimes the log entry will just be hi, hello, other device, hello there, and it's just talking back and forth to one another, or it's just passing someone's some sort of data traffic that has nothing to do with HIPAA stuff. So what you could do is you could trim your logs. That's the first thing you could do. The second thing you could do is you could compress your logs in order to squeeze them down. The third thing is you could do is you could get something called block level storage. Now, block level storage allows you to take data that you put into a storage device, and when it sees a similar bit or byte, it won't count it. So if you have block level storage and you have a terabyte of data, a picture of me that's a big terabyte of size, right? Say there's a picture of me that's 1 terabyte, and then you copy another picture of me in there. Guess how much space it takes? None, because all of the blocks are the same, on both pictures. So now you have 2 terabytes of pictures in there taking up 1 terabyte of space because it's using something called block level storage. And you could do that. You can get block level storage, which would allow the compression of all of your data that have similar bits and bytes down into the same place. That's how companies can do backup of environments where they will allow you to store as much data as they want, because usually your data doesn't create another larger and larger footprint every time you copy that data, and especially logs. Logs are going to be similar in bit bytes that they produce, so that you're going to be able to use block level storage to keep it down to a lower size. The third thing you can do in this environment is use something called cold storage. Now, cold storage is not as expensive as warm storage or hot storage. Warm storage is storage that is nearby that you can access within a certain amount of time. Hot storage is storage that's available right away, and cold storage is storage that's available, but it'll take time to download or unpack. So cold storage is offered. It's called I think Amazon calls it glacier storage. So you can use those log files, you can press them down and put them into cold storage. So now you have the concept, more terminology: hot, warm, cold, block storage, or you can just keep all the files. You may be rich and you could keep all your files in a hot environment nearby, keep a petabyte of data. Oh yeah, somebody put it was Jeremy, of course. Put the link for Glacier Storage from Amazon in here. So yeah, if you're interested in getting glacial storage, then go for it. Because guess what? Glacial storage actually is sit on a system that uses block level storage. So they don't care how much you put in there. They're just going to be able to copy the same bits and blocks. My only warning to you is that video files are usually unique. They don't have the same blocks as other files. So if you have a very video intense environment, you're going to find that your block level storage doesn't do as good a job as it does for logs. But if you're using logs, block level storage is going to rock. Just doesn't rock so much for videos. Even more terminology, even more technology to pour all over you. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. Anybody else have any questions? No, nothing. We'll give you a second. I'm thinking to absorb all that storage and talk we just did. And you can absorb it and then think about your question.
Hey, Gregory. I had a quick
Yes,
question.
sure.
You're talking about retention. Can you kind of give us some helpful hints about, if you're subpoenaed, legal holds, that type of things, and maybe why I don't want to store my data longer than I absolutely need to?
Yeah, so a legal hold is 1 to 3 years in some scenarios. There are legal hold mechanisms that some of your SaaS platforms will give you, like a grace period or a certain amount of time where they won't charge you to store that data. But usually if something goes beyond 3 years, then I probably wouldn't keep it unless I was in the medical environment, or tax environment. If you're in the tax and medical environment, you have to keep things for 7 years, or corporate finances and stuff like that. You have to keep that stuff, but you don't have to keep log files for that long. Usually you only need to keep a log file for a year at the most but if you are on legal hold, it's 1 to 3 years that you have to keep it for. And again, these companies usually will pass over some sort of a exception to you in order to allow for you to, not have to pay extra to keep it.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? Anything else? All right, great. Well, we'll see you again. It's going to get more deep. We're going to go into ports and port traffic and all sorts of more deep technical stuff next time. So get ready, get your questions on. All right, everybody, have a good weekend. Thanks. Bye.